This is my true story. I was a simple man who worked hard my entire life to give my son the comfort I never had. I built something from nothing with my hands, sweat, and hope. But when he became successful, he began to treat me like I was a stain on his perfect world. One day, he looked at me and laughed at my clothes, my face, my poverty. He forgot who made his success possible. I didn't argue. I walked away. But years later, when his company was put up for auction, he saw the buyer's face. And it was mine. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you're watching from and please subscribe so my story can reach others. I remember that morning clearly. It was a bright day, the kind that fools you into thinking life will be kind too. I had gone to visit my son at his office. I wore my best shirt, though it was old and faded. My shoes had cracks in them. My hands were rough from years of labor. I carried a small box of sweets, a habit from the old days whenever I visited him. I thought maybe we could sit together for a few minutes, talk about family, share tea like we used to when he was young. But when I entered his office, everything felt different. The room smelled of money and pride. He was sitting behind a big desk, wearing a suit that probably cost more than what I made in months. His employees were walking around, dressed sharp, whispering, glancing at me with eyes full of judgment. He looked up when I entered, but there was no warmth in his face, just surprise, then annoyance. He leaned back, scanned me from head to toe, and gave a small, mocking smile. "Dad," he said, his tone light but sharp. "Maybe don't come here again. You look like poverty itself." His words hit me harder than I expected. I tried to laugh it off, thinking maybe he was joking. But his eyes didn't laugh. He meant every word. I looked at the people around. Some stopped working, some looked away, but a few couldn't help but smile. Quiet, hidden laughter in the corners of the room. My throat went dry. My heart felt heavy. I tried to say something, but nothing came out. I just stood there, holding that small box of sweets, feeling the weight of every sacrifice I had made for him pressing down on me. I wanted to remind him of the nights I worked double shifts so he could study. I wanted to tell him about the times I went hungry so he could eat. But I didn't. What was the use? His words had already done their damage. They weren't just words. They were truth to him. In his eyes, I wasn't his father anymore. I was an embarrassment. I forced a weak smile and nodded, pretending it didn't hurt. I told him I was just passing by, that I wanted to see him for a moment. He barely responded. He turned back to his laptop, already busy, already done with me. I stood there for a few seconds longer, feeling smaller than I ever had in my life. My hands were shaking. The box of sweets slipped a little, and I caught it just in time. That small act, that tiny clumsy moment, made a few people laugh softly. My son didn't stop them. I walked out quietly. Every step toward the door felt like I was carrying years of disappointment on my back. My legs were heavy, but my mind was heavier. I had thought the worst pain in life was hunger. I was wrong. The worst pain is being looked down upon by the very person you gave your life to raise. When I reached the street, I sat on a bench and stared at the building. It was tall, shining, proud. Everything I had hoped my son would be. And yet, in that moment, all I saw was how far apart we had become. I opened the box of sweets and ate one piece, my hands trembling. The sugar didn't taste sweet. It tasted like years of work turned into ash. I thought of my wife, how proud she used to be of him before she passed. I was thankful she wasn't here to see what he had become. That day, I went home with empty pockets, but a full heart of pain. I looked around my small house, the walls cracked, the floor old. But it was mine. It smelled of dust and memories. I sat down in my chair and thought about everything he had said. The words replayed in my head again and again. You look like poverty itself. Maybe I did. But I also looked like a man who had survived, who had built something out of nothing. I realized then that poverty wasn't wearing torn clothes or living in a small house. Poverty was losing respect, losing humanity, losing love. That day, I made a silent promise to myself. I would never beg for his kindness again. I would never walk into that office again. He had mocked my poverty, but he had no idea what kind of strength that poverty had built inside me. I had built his future once, and if life ever gave me the chance, I would build mine again, not with pride, but with dignity. When I walked out of that office, the sun was still shining, but for me, it felt like night. My chest ached, as if something inside me had cracked and couldn't be fixed. The people on the street passed by, busy with their own lives, not knowing that a father had just been humiliated by his own son. I kept walking, one slow step at a time, my hands shaking, my mind heavy. I didn't want anyone to see the tears forming in my eyes. I swallowed them down, just like I had swallowed every hardship in my life. But that day, the pain was different. It wasn't the pain of hunger or tiredness. It was the pain of shame, deep, quiet, unbearable shame. I couldn't stop thinking about what happened. His voice kept echoing in my head. "You look like poverty itself." The way he said it, like I was something dirty, something to be ashamed of. And the laughter, soft, cruel, poisonous, from the people who worked for him, people who didn't know I was the one who helped him reach where he was. I could still see their smirks, their sideways glances, their pity. I had faced hunger. I had faced loss, but I had never faced that kind of humiliation. It was the kind that stays under your skin, that eats you from the inside. When I reached home, I sat on the small wooden stool near the door. The house was silent, only the clock ticking on the wall. I stared at my hands, rough, calloused, cracked from years of work. Those same hands had built everything he had, every nail, every brick, every piece of sweat that helped him study, start his business, rise to where he was. All came from me. But now, those hands meant nothing to him. He saw only dirt and age, not sacrifice. I sat there for a long time, staring, wondering how love could turn into shame so easily. The next day, word spread. Some relatives heard about what happened at the office. People in the neighborhood started whispering. "His son is rich now," they said. "But he doesn't take care of the old man." They spoke in low tones, but I could hear every word. Some of them pitied me, others judged me. I didn't want their pity. I didn't want their kindness. I just wanted silence. Shame is strange. It makes you hide from the world, even when you did nothing wrong. I stopped going to the market in the mornings like I used to. I started sending a small boy to buy groceries for me. I couldn't bear to see the looks of people who knew. I kept to myself, fixing small things around the house, pretending I was busy. But the truth was, I was running away from my own thoughts. I stopped looking at my reflection in the mirror because every time I did, I saw not myself, but the man my son saw, an old poor man who had become invisible. Sometimes, late at night, I would sit outside and stare at the stars. I would think of my wife, and I'd whisper to her in my head. "You'd be ashamed of him," I'd say. Not because he failed as a son, but because he forgot what love means. I missed her most on nights like that. She had been the bridge between me and him. When she was alive, he still cared, still came to visit, still remembered where he came from. But when she passed, something changed in him. He started chasing things that shine but don't last. Money, fame, pride. And with every success, he lost a piece of his soul. Days turned into weeks. The shame began to settle like dust, always there, even when I tried to clean it away. I thought about visiting him again, maybe to talk, maybe to remind him of what really mattered. But every time I pictured that scene, his mocking face, his cold eyes, I stopped myself. I couldn't take another blow like that. I was too old for more heartbreak. So, I stayed quiet. I let him have his pride. I let him live in his tall buildings and luxury cars while I stayed in my small house with my silence. But deep inside, something was changing. The shame that once made me small was slowly turning into something else. It was turning into strength. I had been humiliated, yes, but I had also seen the truth. My son's wealth was built on a weak foundation. Pride without gratitude. And I knew that one day, pride like that always falls. When it does, I wouldn't have to lift a hand for revenge. Life would take care of it for me. That night, after the shame settled into silence, I sat alone and let my memories take me back to where it all began. I remembered the small shop I opened when I was young, just a wooden stall on the side of a dusty road. I sold tools, spare parts, and anything that could help me earn enough for food. It wasn't much, but it was honest work. Every morning, I woke before sunrise, and every night I came home with aching bones but a heart full of purpose. I wasn't working for wealth. I was working for him, my son. He was my dream, my reason, my only hope. Every coin I earned, I thought of him. Every pain I endured, I told myself it would be worth it when he grew up and lived a better life than mine. I remembered the winters when we had little to eat. I would pretend I wasn't hungry so he could have the last piece of bread. I remembered the summers when the roof leaked, and I used buckets to catch the rain while I worked late into the night fixing broken bicycles for neighbors. When he cried for new clothes, I stitched old ones. When he wanted books for school, I worked extra hours to buy them. I never complained. I wanted him to look at me and see a man who gave everything, not for pride, but for love. He was a good boy once. He used to sit beside me in the shop, counting coins, asking questions about everything. I would tell him stories about life, about honesty, about respect. I thought I was teaching him the right way. I thought he was listening, but maybe the world taught him something else, something colder. I remember the first day he got his job after college. He came home with a smile and a new shirt. I hugged him tight, tears in my eyes. That night, I told my wife, "Our boy will never suffer like we did." She smiled at me and said, "He will make us proud." And he did for a while. He worked hard, moved up in life, bought a car, a house. I was proud, yes. But slowly, I started to see something change. He stopped visiting as often. He stopped asking if I was okay. He started talking about people with money, success, and class, things I knew nothing about. The boy who once counted coins with me began to count only profits. The man who once called me his hero began to see me as a burden. I remembered one day when his mother fell sick. I called him and told him she wanted to see him. He said he was too busy, that meetings couldn't wait. She died 2 days later, calling his name in her sleep. At her funeral, he stood there with tears that looked real, but his heart was already somewhere else, in his business, his world of money. I forgave him then. I told myself he was young, lost, distracted. But now I see he wasn't lost. He had chosen his path. A path where love was small and pride was everything. I remembered every night after her death. The silence, the loneliness, the empty chair where she used to sit. I found comfort in work again. I fixed things for people around the neighborhood, small repairs, small money, but enough to keep my days full. It wasn't wealth, but it was dignity. And every time I earned a few coins, I still thought of him. I saved some for him, just in case he ever needed it. I never stopped being a father, even when he stopped being a son. As I sat there in my old chair, the memories came like waves. I could see the younger version of myself, sweaty, tired, smiling at a small boy who was my world. I could see that boy's hands holding mine, his eyes full of trust. And then I saw the man he became, the one who looked at me with disgust, who laughed at my poverty, who forgot who had built the ground he stood on. It's strange how love and pain can live in the same heart. Even after everything, I couldn't hate him. But I could never forget either. I realized that night that the man who mocked my poverty had forgotten the truth, that his success was built on my suffering. He had built the walls, but I had laid the bricks. He had built an empire, but I had built him. As I looked around my small house, the cracked walls seemed to whisper to me, "You gave him everything." And I did. But I also knew something he didn't. The hands that build can also rebuild. I may have been poor, but I was not powerless. Life takes strange turns, and someday it would show him that what he mocked would one day stand taller than his pride. After that day at his office, something inside me changed. I didn't call him anymore. I didn't visit. The bridge between us that I had spent years trying to hold together had finally broken. He didn't notice. Maybe he felt relieved. Maybe he thought he had finally freed himself from the shadow of an old man he was ashamed to call his father. I stayed quiet and watched from far away as he built his life higher and higher, climbing ladders made of arrogance and money. Every time I saw his name in the papers, it was about success, expansion, or awards. And every time I felt a mix of pride and pain. Pride because he was my blood, pain because I knew what that kind of pride does to a man. He stopped visiting our neighborhood. When he did come once for a charity event, he didn't even look my way. He spoke to reporters about helping the poor, about giving back to the community. The same community that raised him, the same community I worked for day and night. People clapped for him. They called him generous, noble, kind. I stood at the edge of the crowd, listening, invisible. No one knew that the man they were praising had turned his back on the one who gave him everything. I didn't stay long. I left before the event ended, walking home through the narrow lanes, my heart heavy. Sometimes neighbors would ask, "Doesn't your son visit you anymore?" I would smile and say he was busy, that he had a big life now, that he traveled for work. It was easier to lie than to admit the truth. It was easier to protect his name than to explain how success had turned him into a stranger. People respected him. I didn't want to change that. I had already lost his love. I didn't want to take away his dignity too. That's what parents do. They protect their children, even when those children forget them. But inside, I could feel the distance growing wider every day. It wasn't just miles. It was something deeper, something colder. I would look at the old photos on my wall, the ones where he was still a boy with bright eyes and a crooked smile. I kept them clean, dusted them every week, even though it hurt to look. Sometimes, when I passed by his company building, I would stop for a moment and look at the tall glass windows. I wondered if he ever thought of me when he looked out from up there. Did he ever miss home? Did he ever think of the man who made sure he had shoes on his feet and books in his hands? I doubted it. Success had deafened him to everything that didn't shine. He began introducing himself to others as a self-made man. I heard that once from a friend who worked for him. "He tells people his father was just a laborer," my friend said. "He never talks about you." That word, laborer, burned deep. It wasn't the word itself that hurt. I wasn't ashamed of work. I was proud of it. What hurt was the way he said it, as if it was something dirty, something to hide. As if the sweat on my brow was something he had to wipe from his name. After that, I stopped asking about him. I stopped trying to know what he was doing, what new project he had started, what car he drove. I let him live in his world of lights and luxury, while I lived in mine of quiet and simplicity. I wasn't jealous. I didn't want his money. I just wanted respect, a simple thank you for all the years I gave. But respect can't be bought, and love can't be forced. So, I gave him what he seemed to want most: distance. Years went by. I grew older. My hands shook when I worked, and my legs ached when I walked too long. The world around me kept moving fast, but I moved slower. I didn't need much, just enough to eat, to sleep, and to remember. Sometimes on his birthday, I would light a candle in front of his photo. I didn't call. I didn't send gifts. I just whispered a small prayer for him. Not for success, but for humility. I prayed that life would someday teach him what I couldn't. And deep down, I knew it would. Life has a way of bringing proud men to their knees. Not out of cruelty, but out of truth. The higher you climb without gratitude, the harder you fall. I didn't wish for his downfall, but I knew it would come. Every empire built on disrespect eventually cracks. I had seen it before in others, and I would see it again in him. I just didn't know when. So, I waited. I didn't chase revenge. I didn't hope for pain. I simply waited for the day when the son who mocked my poverty would finally understand what real wealth meant. Not money, not success, but heart. And when that day came, I promised myself I would be there. Not to laugh, not to gloat, but to stand in silence. Because sometimes silence is louder than any words. It started with whispers. At first, small ones that people ignored. A delayed payment here, a missed deal there. Then, slowly, the rumors grew louder. My son's company, the same empire he had built with arrogance and pride, was in trouble. I heard it from the shopkeeper near the market, the one who read the newspaper every morning. "Your boy's company," he said quietly. "Things aren't looking good." I didn't react. I just nodded and walked away. I didn't want to believe it, but deep down, I knew this was how life works. When you build something on ego, the cracks always start from the inside. At first, he tried to hide it. He still posted photos of business meetings, of big offices, of smiling faces. But behind those smiles, things were falling apart. One wrong investment, one deal too risky, one decision made out of greed instead of sense. That's all it takes. His company began bleeding money. Partners pulled out. Clients left. Employees stopped showing up. The same people who once laughed at me in his office now whispered behind his back. The same men who bowed to him stopped answering his calls. I watched it all from a distance. I didn't celebrate. I didn't wish for it, but I wasn't surprised either. Life has a way of teaching lessons no parent can. I remembered his words. "You look like poverty itself." Now he was the one staring at poverty from the other side. But his poverty wasn't in clothes or food. It was in pride, in the emptiness that comes when money disappears and love is nowhere to be found. Weeks turned into months. News spread like fire. His company was collapsing fast. He tried to borrow, to find investors, to save what he could. But no one trusted him anymore. The same arrogance that made him powerful now made him blind. He thought he could fix everything alone. But life doesn't listen to pride. Slowly, everything he had worked for began to vanish. The cars, the properties, the luxury, all slipping through his fingers one by one. People started talking in the neighborhood again. "Did you hear?" they said. "His company's going under." Some said it with pity, others with satisfaction. I stayed quiet. Every night I sat outside, looking at the sky, thinking about him. I wondered if he ever thought about me now. Did he remember that old man he once laughed at? Did he think of the home he had turned away from? I hoped he did. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted him to understand. The world doesn't care about your wealth. It only remembers your character. One evening, I heard he had lost his biggest contract. The next day, I saw his photo in the newspaper again, but not in the success section. It was on the business failure page. His company had filed for bankruptcy. I held the paper in my trembling hands, staring at his face. He looked tired, older, defeated. His eyes, once full of pride, were now hollow. I couldn't stop the tears that came. I didn't know if they were for him or for everything we had lost together: love, trust, family. In the weeks that followed, debt collectors came for him. They took the cars, the house, the office furniture, everything. He was drowning in what he once thought would save him: money. I heard he tried to ask for help from old friends, but none of them answered. People love you when you're shining. They vanish when the light fades. I had learned that lesson long ago, but he was learning it too late. He sold what little he could to pay his debts, but it wasn't enough. Eventually, the court ordered that his company's assets be auctioned. Everything he had built, the empire he had once bragged about, was now going to be sold off to strangers. I sat there with the newspaper in my hand, staring at the announcement. The date, the time, the place, all printed in cold black ink. My heart felt heavy, but not out of anger. It was sadness, deep and quiet. Life had done what I could not. It had shown him the truth. That night, I sat in my old chair and closed my eyes. I thought of that day in his office, his laugh, his words, his eyes filled with mockery. Now, those same eyes would see loss. Those same lips that once said poor would beg for a chance. But I didn't want him to beg. I just wanted him to see what I had always known. That pride is the most dangerous kind of hunger. It eats everything, even love. As I sat there, I made a decision. I didn't make it out of revenge, but out of calm resolve. I would attend that auction. I would go there not as a father seeking justice, but as a man who had learned that silence has its own power. I had nothing fancy, nothing shiny, but I had something far stronger: dignity. And soon he would understand that the poor man he mocked wasn't as poor as he thought. The morning of the auction came quietly, like any other day. But inside me, there was a storm. I woke before sunrise, sat at the edge of my bed, and stared at my hands for a long time. These hands that once built his dreams, these hands that were mocked for being rough and old, today, they were steady. I dressed in the same simple clothes I had worn for years. A clean shirt, faded but ironed, and my old shoes polished until they almost shined. I didn't need to look rich. I didn't need to prove anything. I was not going there for revenge. I was going to close a chapter. When I arrived, the auction hall was already full. Men in suits, investors, bankers, all waiting, talking in low voices, flipping through papers. The air smelled of expensive perfume and failure. I walked in quietly, unnoticed at first. No one saw me as a threat. Just another old man sitting at the back, watching. But I wasn't watching for greed. I was watching my son. I saw him standing near the front, his face pale, his eyes heavy with sleeplessness. His suit looked the same, but he didn't. The arrogance was gone. The shine had faded. His hands trembled as he adjusted his tie. For the first time in years, he looked small, fragile. I watched him closely as the auction began. One by one, the items were called out: machines, furniture, vehicles, properties. Each one represented a piece of his empire. With every sale, I saw another piece of him fall away. He stood there helpless, forced to watch strangers buy everything he had built. There was no laughter now, no pride, no staff to applaud him. Just silence and loss. I listened as the auctioneer called out the next item, the company name itself, the final piece, the brand he had created, the one he thought would make him immortal. The room went quiet. The bidding began. Numbers echoed in the air, high, fast, brutal. He looked around, desperate, his eyes darting from face to face. I could see his jaw tighten as the price climbed. I waited, patiently. When the room began to slow, when the last few bidders hesitated, I raised my hand. For a moment, no one noticed. Then the auctioneer nodded, calling out my bid. Heads turned. People looked around, confused. I sat still, calm, my eyes fixed on the man who once called me poor. His head snapped up, and his eyes met mine. I saw shock, disbelief, then fear. The bidding continued, but I didn't stop. Every time someone raised the number, I followed. My voice never shook. My hand never trembled. Around me, whispers started. Who is that old man? Why is he bidding so high? No one knew. No one recognized me. But he did. My son recognized me. His lips parted slightly, but no words came out. I could see it in his face, the realization hitting him harder with every moment. The room fell quiet as the final call came. The auctioneer's hammer lifted, paused in the air, then came down hard. Sold, he said loudly, to the gentleman in the back. The echo of that word, sold, rang through the hall like a bell ending a long war. My son froze, staring straight at me, his face drained of color. He blinked as if trying to wake up from a bad dream. But it wasn't a dream. It was life giving him the same lesson he once gave me: cruelty without warning. People clapped softly, as they do at the end of business deals. To them, it was just another sale. But to me, it was something deeper. It wasn't victory. It wasn't revenge. It was closure. I had come full circle. The man who once walked out of that same office humiliated was now the owner of everything that pride had destroyed. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just sat there quietly, feeling a strange calm settle over me. As the crowd began to leave, I stood up slowly. My legs were tired, but steady. I walked past the rows of chairs toward the exit, not looking for him, but knowing he was watching me. I didn't need to say a word. My silence was louder than any speech I could have given. Outside, the air was cool. I took a deep breath and looked at the sky. It felt lighter than it had in years. I thought of my wife then, how she would have smiled at this moment. Not out of revenge, but because she would have understood what it meant. It wasn't about taking back what was lost. It was about dignity finding its way home again. For years, my son believed I was poor because I had nothing. But today, he saw the truth. I had everything that mattered. Respect, patience, strength. Things that no money could buy and no failure could take away. The day after the auction was quiet, almost too quiet. I woke up before dawn, as I always did. The light from the morning sun fell through the window onto my old table where the papers from the auction rested. My name was printed clearly on the top, owner. I stared at it for a long time. My eyes blurred, not because of pride, but because of everything it meant. The company that once threw me out like trash now belonged to me. Life has strange ways of returning what's taken, not to reward, but to teach. I made tea and sat outside on my porch. The air was cold, but it felt clean. My mind went back to that room, to my son's face when he heard my name announced. That single moment was burned into my memory. The same mouth that once called me poor had fallen silent. The same eyes that once looked at me with mockery now stared with disbelief, almost fear. But I didn't feel joy. I didn't smile. I didn't want revenge anymore. I just wanted peace, the kind that comes when life finally balances its scales. Later that day, I went to the company building. It still had his name on the front, though it didn't belong to him anymore. I stood outside for a while, watching people come and go. Some of them recognized me. They looked confused, whispering to each other. The security guard, the same one who once asked me to wait outside years ago, stood a little straighter this time. He opened the door for me with a quiet bow. I walked in slowly, the same old man with worn shoes. But this time, not as a beggar for respect, but as the man in charge. The hallways looked the same. The walls, the lights, even the smell of coffee in the air, all unchanged. But the feeling was different. Back then, I had felt small. Today, I felt calm. Not powerful. Calm. There's a difference. Power makes noise. Calm makes peace. I passed by the same spot where he once stood, where he told me I looked like poverty itself. I stopped for a second and placed my hand on the desk. It was cold, smooth, polished, just like the heart that once sat behind it. I didn't stay long. I wasn't there to celebrate or to command anyone. I had already decided what to do. I called my lawyer, the same man who had helped me quietly over the years, the one who knew my story. I told him to prepare papers transferring the ownership to charity, an organization that helped workers, widows, and fathers like me. I didn't want his company. I didn't need his name. I just wanted to free myself from it. Let it serve someone else. Someone who would know what hunger feels like, what struggle tastes like. I didn't want to own the ruins of his pride. I wanted to build something better out of it. When I left the building, I saw him standing near the gate. He hadn't seen me yet. He looked thinner now, his clothes wrinkled, his eyes sunken. He wasn't surrounded by his staff or friends anymore. He was alone, completely alone. I stopped for a moment and looked at him from afar. It hurt, even then. No matter what he had done, he was still my son. Watching him break like that didn't bring me joy. It brought a deep, quiet sadness. I wanted to walk to him, to put my hand on his shoulder, to tell him it would be all right. But I didn't. Not because of pride, but because I knew this was a moment he needed to face himself. No father, no wealth, no noise, just him and the truth. He looked up suddenly and saw me. For a moment, his face froze. Then I saw tears gather in his eyes. He didn't move. Neither did I. We just stood there, two men bound by blood and brokenness, staring across the distance that pride had built between us. There were no words left to say. Everything had already been said, and everything that mattered was already understood. I turned and walked away slowly. The world around me was busy, loud, alive. But I heard nothing. My heart was full, not of victory, but of peace. He had seen it with his own eyes. The truth that money cannot erase, the truth that respect cannot be bought, and the truth that dignity outlives success. That day, when I went back home, I sat in my chair and looked at the papers one last time before sending them away. I smiled softly to myself. The poor man had bought an empire, but he had no desire to own it. What I wanted, what I had always wanted, was not power or wealth. It was to remind my son, even if it took the rest of his life to understand, that the value of a man isn't measured by what he owns, but by what he honors. When the news spread that I was the one who had bought the company, the whole city seemed to freeze for a moment. Newspapers ran the story like it was a miracle. The same people who had once laughed at me now spoke my name with surprise and confusion. Reporters called it a poetic twist of fate, but for me, it wasn't poetry. It was pain turned into purpose. I didn't answer any calls. I didn't give interviews. I didn't want attention. All I wanted was to sit in peace and let the truth do the talking. But life, as always, had one more scene to show me. That afternoon, my son came to see me. I was sitting outside, in the same old chair where I had once waited for him to visit, year after year. I saw him walking toward me from a distance. His steps were slow, uncertain. His shoulders, once proud and straight, were bent. His face had aged more in months than I had in years. His clothes, though neat, no longer looked expensive. The shine of success was gone, replaced by the dull gray of regret. I could see it before he even opened his mouth. Life had finally humbled him. He stopped a few feet away from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was heavier than any words could carry. I could see tears forming in his eyes, but he tried to hold them back. Pride dies hard, even when a man has lost everything. I looked at him, not with anger, not with pity, just with quiet. He looked like a child again, lost, scared, searching for something he had thrown away long ago. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, trembling. He asked me why. Why I had done it. Why I had bought his company. Why I had not told him. His voice broke halfway through the questions, his lips quivering as he tried to speak. I let him finish. Then I looked at him, my son, my blood, my greatest pride and deepest wound, and I told him the truth. I told him I didn't do it to hurt him. I didn't do it to show power. I did it because I needed him to see that wealth means nothing without respect, that success built on shame will always collapse, and that the poor man he mocked still had something he could never buy: dignity. He stood there, tears rolling down his face. I could see the moment it all sank in. The auction, the silence, the look in my eyes that day. He realized it wasn't revenge. It was a mirror showing him who he had become and what he had lost. His voice cracked again as he whispered that he was sorry. Sorry for the words, for the years, for the distance. I didn't say anything back. Sorry was too small for what had happened, and forgiveness wasn't something I could just hand over like charity. It wasn't anger keeping me quiet. It was exhaustion. Years of heartbreak had drained me of the need to explain or accuse. He sat down beside me on the ground, like a child sitting next to his father for comfort. I didn't move. I let the silence fill the space. Sometimes silence is more powerful than speech. It was the same silence I had carried for years, the one that had kept me alive when words could have destroyed me. And now, it was teaching him too. I could feel him shaking slightly. His hands were clasped together, his head bowed. I wondered if he remembered the day he told me not to visit his office. I wondered if he remembered how I had stood there, small and humiliated, while his staff laughed. Maybe he did. Maybe that memory was burning inside him now, just as it had burned inside me for years. The air between us was heavy, but not hateful. For the first time in a long while, I saw my son, not the businessman, not the prideful man, but the boy I once carried on my shoulders. The boy who used to hold my hand. The boy who once promised to take care of me when I grew old. And though that boy was gone, a part of him flickered in that moment, faint, but real. When he finally looked up, his face was wet with tears. He tried to speak again, but I stopped him with a small gesture. You don't need to say anything. I told him quietly. Life already has. He nodded slowly, his eyes full of pain and understanding. I didn't tell him that I had already given the company away. He didn't need to know yet. That was a lesson for another day. For now, it was enough that he saw me. Truly saw me. For the first time in years. He left soon after, walking slowly, shoulders still bent but lighter than before. I watched him until he disappeared down the road. I didn't know if he would come back. I didn't know if he would ever change completely. But I knew one thing. The man who once mocked my poverty had finally seen the true meaning of wealth. And that was enough for me. The next day, he came again. I was sitting outside my house, fixing a small crack on the wooden chair I'd had for years. When I saw him walk up the road, I didn't move. This time, he wasn't wearing his usual clothes. No suit, no tie. Just a plain shirt and trousers. Clothes that made him look like the son I once knew. His steps were slower now, more careful, like each one carried a memory of his past mistakes. When he reached me, he stood there quietly for a moment, eyes down, before finally speaking. His voice was low, tired, trembling. He said he needed to understand, not just what I had done, but why. I set down the hammer in my hand and looked at him. I could see the weight on his shoulders, the dark circles under his eyes, the defeat in his face. He was no longer the man who once laughed at me in his office. That man had died with his company. What stood before me now was what life had built from the ashes, a broken, humbled version of him, still searching for forgiveness he didn't know how to ask for. He asked again, "Why would you buy the company, Dad? Why would you take everything from me when I already had nothing left?" His voice cracked on the last words. There was no anger in his tone, only confusion and guilt. I didn't answer right away. I looked out at the street, at the same road I had walked for years, the same path I had taken home after he humiliated me. Then I looked back at him and said softly, "You called me poor. I just wanted to show you what real wealth looks like. Dignity." He stood there, frozen. The wind blew gently between us, carrying the silence that followed. His lips moved, but no sound came. I could see his eyes fill again, but this time it wasn't pride or frustration. It was shame, the kind that cuts deep and leaves scars that never heal. He nodded slowly, as if the truth had finally pierced through all the layers of ego that had blinded him for so long. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words never came. He just stood there, his head lowered, his shoulders trembling. I didn't say anything else. There was nothing left to explain. I wasn't proud of what I did, but I wasn't sorry either. Life had given me the chance to return the lesson that time couldn't teach him. I hadn't shouted, I hadn't cursed, I hadn't fought. I had simply waited and let time do what words never could. For years I carried his insult like a stone in my heart. That day I finally set it down. He dropped to his knees, his hands covering his face. I watched as tears fell through his fingers and hit the ground. I didn't move to comfort him. Not out of cruelty, but because I knew this was something he needed to feel. Pain teaches where comfort cannot. He needed to face the truth alone. The truth that no amount of success, money, or pride could ever make a man rich if he had no respect for where he came from. I turned my eyes away and looked at the road again. The world around us went on as if nothing had changed. Children playing, dogs barking, neighbors passing by, unaware that a father and son were standing at the edge of their own history. He stayed there for a long time, silent, broken, crying. Then finally, he stood up. He wiped his face with his sleeve and looked at me, his eyes red but steady. He whispered a thank you, though his voice barely carried it. Then he walked away without another word. As he disappeared down the road, I felt something lift off my chest. It wasn't happiness, it wasn't revenge, it was peace. For the first time in years, I could breathe without bitterness. I had seen him at his highest, laughing at my poverty, and now I had seen him at his lowest, learning the meaning of humility. The balance was restored. I went back to fixing the chair. My hands were steady again. I didn't need applause or recognition. I didn't need people to know what I had done. The victory wasn't in owning his company. The victory was in owning myself again, my dignity, my strength, my peace. He had mocked my poverty, but I had shown him something far greater than wealth. Real power is quiet. Real strength is patient. Real wealth is being able to look at the one who hurt you and feel no hatred. When the sun began to set, I looked at the sky and whispered a small prayer. Not for him to suffer, but for him to find his way back to himself. I didn't know if he would ever come back, but I hoped that when he did, he would come not as a rich man or a broken man, but simply as my son. After that day, I didn't see him for a long time. The house became quiet again, but this time, the silence didn't hurt. It was peaceful. I had no anger left in me, no bitterness. I had said what needed to be said, and life had done what it needed to do. Sometimes I would sit on the porch, look down the same road, and think about everything that had happened. The shame, the years of distance, the fall, the auction, the tears. It all felt like a dream that had lasted too long. But through it all, one thing stayed clear. No matter how far a man runs from humility, life always finds a way to bring him back to it. Days turned into weeks. Word spread slowly through town that the company had been donated to charity. People talked about it with surprise. Why would he give it away? They asked. Some thought I was crazy, others called it noble. But I didn't care what anyone thought. I didn't buy the company to own it. I bought it to close a wound, to take something that was born from arrogance and turn it into something good. The same walls that once echoed with pride and cruelty would now feed families and give jobs to those who needed them most. That was enough for me. I never told my son about the donation. I didn't need him to know. If he ever found out, I wanted him to find out from someone else. Not from me, not from my lips, but from life itself. I wanted him to understand that real wealth isn't what you keep. It's what you give when you have nothing left to prove. I wanted him to know that the poorest man in the world is the one who has everything but respect. Sometimes I would think back to that moment, when he told me I looked like poverty itself. Those words used to hurt like fire. They used to echo in my head at night when I couldn't sleep. But now, they didn't hurt anymore. Now, they reminded me of how far I had come. I smiled sometimes thinking about it, because in the end, he was right. I did look like poverty. But that day at the auction, he saw what real poverty was, the emptiness inside a man who lost his humility. Months passed before I heard from him again. One evening, I got a letter in the mail. The handwriting was shaky, uneven. His. I opened it slowly, half afraid, half curious. Inside, there were only a few words. Thank you for teaching me what I refused to learn. I'm working again. I'm starting small this time. I hope you're proud of me. I read those words over and over. My eyes burned with tears, but this time they weren't from pain. They were from relief. Maybe, finally, he understood. Maybe life had reached him where I couldn't. I didn't write back. I didn't need to. There are some answers you don't send in words. You send them in silence, in patience, in prayer. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the small wooden box where I kept the few things that truly mattered. My wife's photo, the key to the old shop, and now, his letter. As time passed, I began to feel lighter. The burden I had carried for years, the shame, the disappointment, had faded away. In its place was peace. Real, quiet peace. I spent my days tending to my garden, fixing things around the neighborhood, helping people who reminded me of myself when I was younger, honest, tired, but hopeful. And sometimes, when people asked about my son, I didn't speak of the cruelty or the pride. I only said, he's learning, because that was the truth. We all learn eventually, one way or another. One night, as I sat outside under the stars, I realized something important. The greatest revenge in life isn't anger or punishment. It's growth. It's staying kind when the world has been cruel. It's standing tall when others expect you to fall. I had been called poor, humiliated, and forgotten. Yet here I was, at peace, richer than ever, not in money, but in spirit. He had lost his empire, but I had gained something far greater. Freedom from pain, freedom from pride, freedom from needing anything from anyone. When I closed my eyes that night, I whispered a small prayer for him again. Not for success, not for wealth, but for humility, the only thing that truly saves a man. Because in the end, everything we own fades. But dignity, once found, never dies. That was the final lesson life gave me. Pride built on disrespect always collapses, but respect built on struggle stands forever. My son mocked my poverty once, but now he knows. It wasn't poverty at all. It was strength, patience, and the kind of wealth no auction can ever buy.